right, welcome to the Big Texas Podcast presented by Texas Young Republicans. I'm your host, Jordan Overturf, coming to you once again with a candidate who is seeking to turn over one of these Democratic seats in House District 132. Our guest today is Mike Schofield. We're going to get to Mike in a second, but first, of course, we've got to go through a few housekeeping items. This weekend, we're going down to Mike's district, House District 132 in the Katy area, western half of not Travis County, Harris County. I know where these places are in Texas, I promise. Going to Harris County this Saturday, YRs, it's a national deployment. Actually, YRNF is coming down to block walk for Wesley Hunt. Texas YRs are showing up for our official deployment for Mike Schofield in House District 132. If you want to find out more about that deployment, you can still sign up at texasyr.gop/deployments. Again, texasyr.gop/deployments. You can also find out more about all of our upcoming deployments. We'll be going out every weekend from now until Election Day to make sure that we are knocking doors, talking to as many voters as possible in these key districts. These are all key districts that Republicans are trying to either flip back or maintain control of, so that way we can keep Texas strong. We can go ahead into the next session with a Republican majority in the Texas House and keep Texas moving forward in the right direction. Again, if you want to learn more about that, you can go to our website, texasyr.gop/deployment. We got all kinds of fun technical glitches going on here. We're trying new things out, new kind of studio setup. So apologies for that. We're still working out the bugs, and you'll see it in this episode. Thank you so much, Mike, for your patience. Zoom is not perfect. We had to switch to FaceTime at a certain point. So you'll see all of this unless you're listening to the audio version of this, in which case, God bless you, because you are out in the world, probably, hopefully, or you're just sitting on your couch eating Cheetos and listening to this. Either way, we're grateful. Make sure you follow Texas YRs on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you want to follow the podcast, we are on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you get that. Big Texas Podcast. Look us up. You can find us. It's real easy to find us now. Okay. My guest today, again, Mike Schofield, House District 132. Had a great time talking to him. He actually served in the 84th and the 85th Texas legislature. He was defeated in 2018, and so he's trying to recapture that seat. Had a great time talking to Mike. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Mr. Mike Schofield. I guess, with so much going on right now, we're 3 weeks out from the start of early voting. How are you feeling about the campaign at this point?
First, thanks for having me on. And we're feeling great. Our campaign has been focused on knocking on the doors of swing voters. And that's really how you gauge where you're doing. If you knock on your friends' doors, you know what you're here. Knock on the other side's doors, you figure you know you're. But we have been knocking on swing voters and getting a terrific reception. That is a good sign for the temperature of the electorate out in Katy.
So as we look down the barrel of this election cycle, there's so much going on. Do you feel like your prior experience, working on campaigns has helped you, or has this been kind of a complete reboot for you in the campaign?
Actually, it's been a lot more like a normal campaign than we anticipated. We took our normal template and we're sort of ready to adjust it for the COVID world. Come to find out that with our core, which is block walk, I do most especially, it really hasn't changed much. I expected, and we have all these new protocols we put into place because we expected the voters to act differently. We put a door hanger on the door and then knock and then go way back into the yard. And we're finding that people are treating it like they normally do. I get basically the same percentage of people answering the door that always do, and they will come out past their door to get within a conversational distance of you. So they're not afraid of you knocking on their door. And so it's been about what we normally expect in a campaign. So we sort of readjusted back to our usual campaign mode.
Well, that's good to hear. I know that YRs have been working real hard to, go and do these deployments elsewhere, and we've seen a very positive response from the campaigns and the local clubs welcoming YRs from across the state. We've actually got one coming to your district, House District 132, this weekend. So. It's good to hear that it's a positive response. For folks who are going to be new to this district, though, can you kind of give us a feel for what is House District 132 like? We know it's close to Houston, but is it really Houston these days, or has Katy kind of developed its own identity out there in the western half of the county?
Well, Katy always had its own identity. We used to be considered a long way away from Houston, and then Houston sort of came out towards us. But what you'll find is that it's a very different attitude. I lived in Houston for decades. Folks in Katy are really friendly, and so it's really it's a good place. First of all, to get your feet wet knocking on doors if you're new to it and you're volunteering, because folks are very forgiving. They're happy to have you. Even people who aren't voting for you are nice. So you might get the lady at the door saying, "Well, I'm a Democrat, but I'll give this to my husband." It's just not what I'm used to seeing in other parts of the world, particularly in the city. We also have a whole chunk of the district. The whole center of the district is completely brand new. Let's just say when I lost the election in November 2018, it was grass. It is now thousands of houses. One subdivision, Ellison, houses, and around we have Santana Lake, ADO, a bunch of other subdivisions that have gone in since then. And these people are a mixture of folks who are completely new to the area and folks who just moved a few miles to get a bigger house. And it's been fun knocking on those doors because, again, those people are nice, and they'll tell you, "I don't know much about Texas. Tell me what I need to know. I'm completely new."
Yeah, I mean, so much of these deployments have felt like kind of introducing ourselves to new voters. And when you talk about the dynamics of Texas and how it's changing, demographers will tell you you're getting about, is it 600 new births every day, and then it's about 400 new people who move in to the state every day. So about 1,000 new Texans every day, but about close to a 50-50 split in terms of folks who are just moving here from elsewhere. How do you start that conversation when you're talking to someone who's moved from another state, be it a Democrat state or a Republican state where things are run a little bit differently? How do you begin that conversation, and what are some of the highlights that you share with those folks?
Well, I wrote the constitutional amendment we passed to ban state income tax. So I typically start with that, and that will get, it doesn't matter if they're a Republican, if they're a Democrat, if they consider themselves a completely non-political person. They kind of like that because the chances are wherever they came from, they paid out the nose in the state income tax, and it's often one of the reasons they came here. There are only 7 states left that don't have one. So I start with that, which is it's a little microcosm of how Texas is different from where they came from. I also point out that, particularly for those people from the north, that we are now in our worst weather. It's hot and humid. You don't have to shovel that. They like that a lot.
So as we get closer to the election day, how has the conversation shifted in response to obviously COVID and every day it seems like there's something new for voters to respond to. I guess as you're out there talking to voters, how has that conversation shifted?
Surprisingly, it really hasn't. We specifically asked voters if they have any concerns related to COVID or the economy to sort of get them rolling, kind of give them something to think about. Because, when you knock on a voter's door and they're watching the ball game or making dinner, they did not have, talking about state issues in mind. So we always like to prompt them. And so I specifically prompt them with a softball that will give them something to talk about. And they usually go, "No, we're good." And then they'd rather talk about their property taxes or school or, any of those kind of issues. So really, what we're seeing on the doorstep is a normal campaign. It's surprising. Everybody expects everything to be dominated by COVID and the world coming to an end and everything, but that's not the way people in Katy and Cypress are taking it. They want to know how you're going to make it so they can afford to continue to live here and how you're going to make sure that people don't take their jobs away by shutting down the oil and gas industry.
Yeah, I've been surprised to hear that the Green New Deal conversation has kind of gone to the side, especially as we talked about protecting school funding, right? And the oil and gas industry in Texas plays such a huge part in providing that funding for our schools. Do you think voters are surprised to learn, how at conflict something like the Green New Deal would be, not just with Texas's economy, but, for such a benchmark issue like public schools?
Well, they're not surprised in our area because we live just adjacent to the portion of I-10 that's known as the Energy Corridor. So literally tens of thousands of my constituents work in oil and gas or consult to companies that have oil and gas clients. So it is top of their mind. Ancillary issues like where the tax money goes isn't their problem. Their problem is if the Democrats succeed in shutting down oil and gas, they're out of work, along with tens of thousands of their neighbors who'd all be competing with each other to try to get, jobs in the gig economy driving for Uber. So people in my district don't need to be told how bad the Green New Deal is for them. They want to know how anybody who's running in Katy and Cypress could even think of supporting something that would put them all out of work.
Yeah, I mean, it seems ridiculous that so many of the Democrats have latched on to that idea, and Biden has tried to backtrack some of his discussions on that on the national level. But for the most part, Democrats aren't shying away from a lot of these policies that are clamping down on the freedom of businesses to operate. The forced shutdowns, and now the attacks on police that we're seeing, calls for defunding police departments. Are voters in House District 132 starting to see what's happening elsewhere in the state and the country and voicing that concern when you're talking to them at the doors?
Oh, yeah. Nobody moved out of Houston and into our district because they want to have unsafe neighborhoods. A lot of these folks are either getting a bigger house or for the first time getting a house with a yard in a neighborhood. And the last thing they want to hear is that, well, now that you got here, we're going to make it unsafe. And they are not buying that. The Texas Democratic Caucus put out a statement the other day saying, oh, none of us are for defunding the police. I don't know where you get that idea. Well, because your allies in the Houston City Council proposed it, and your allies in the Austin City Council passed it, and Fort Worth and San Antonio are looking at it. They know full well that if the progressives get in, they'll defund the police to completely out of existence if they could. And that's not what they're about. And, this radical left-wing movement that the media is playing into and everybody acts as if it was just natural is just something that is completely alien to people who work for a living and buy a house and try to make their mortgage payments. And they're not going for it. And it's one of the first things that people mention to me. They'll see it on my push card. And of course, I also have a lot of police officers and firefighters and retired police officers and firefighters in my district because they move out to get a nice place to live and they can't afford to live in Houston. And, obviously they have no interest in that, but neither do their neighbors. The first thing that happens when there's a break-in is you call the cops. You don't call a progressive and say, keep me safe. And so that dog won't hunt. I mean, there's going to be a blowback. The question is whether it's in time for this election day or whether it's just 2022. But nobody is going for that except the most radical of the progressives.
The governor has been very vocal in his pushback on the cities that have either proposed or passed these measures to defund the police. Have you stepped up in your support, or are you joining with the governor and his proposals to back the blue?
Well, we absolutely back the blue. What I don't back is those cities who are doing this. I do not favor sending state resources in to provide them with police protection. It's up to the voters of those cities to say to their council, are you out of your mind?
Yeah.
Instead, why should my voters pay to police the city of Austin? If those people want to go without police protection, you let them. I don't know if you noticed this, but when the police chief got stuck with a 1/3 cut to his budget, he started trying to rejigger and move around his dollars to get it out on the street. So he wanted to get rid of some of the ambassador roles and put more police cars on the street. And the left-wing activists said, no, that's exactly what we don't want. We don't want police on our streets. Well, yeah, the left-wing activists don't. The people do. Even the liberals in Austin want to be safe. And the last thing they want some New York style radical left wing stuff, keeping them from having their children be safe in their own neighborhood. And so I absolutely back the blue, but I absolutely do not favor taking the pressure off of these cities by saying, oh, if you don't want to pay for this service, we'll pay for it. What other city services will they decide not to pay for and have taxpayers from the rest of the state chip in? No, if you want to make your state unsafe, now I would be in favor of taking over the government of the city if they're going to turn their place into a war zone. And, we've done that with the schools. And if we just have to say, I'm sorry, but you've lost your city charter because you have failed to provide basic services, that I'd be in favor of. But I am not in favor of having taxpayers from Katy and Cypress pay for Austin police because left-wingers on the Austin City Council refuse to.
Yeah, and we've got a young Republican, Justin Berry, who is fighting hard in that particular district, House District 47 in Western Travis County. Those voters are certainly concerned about all the things they've seen coming from Austin, from the ending of the camping ordinance and the defunding of police, the pushback on the property tax measures that were passed by the legislature, and then to turn around and say we're going to defund our police and ask for support from the state for these riots and protests that are going on, destroying businesses. I mean, there's so much going on. Earlier in our discussion, you had mentioned that voters, for the most part, at the door are having basic election type conversations with you. So I want to bring it back into focus for you and the campaign. We're getting closer to the session, which means the policy discussions that are going on are taking shape. Obviously, anything to do with defunding the police, criminal justice reform, COVID pandemic response protocols are going to be up for discussion, not to mention going into a budget cycle where we're going to have to look at some cuts, more than likely, and redistricting. We can't forget, that was the big prize that everyone was talking about. And now it seems like that conversation has gotten a little bit lost. For you personally, though, when you're going and you're talking to a voter, be it at the door, on the phone, at an event somewhere, what are the two priorities that you are telling them that you have for the legislature this coming cycle in January? What are the two priorities that, if elected, you want to take to the legislature?
Well, as you said, the session will be dominated by the exigencies of the session. And in this case, that will be the redistricting, because you have to do it, and the budget, which is, as we always like to say, the one bill you're required to pass. Well, COVID has put a $5 billion hole in the budget so far. That's the estimate that the comptroller, Glenn Hager, has said. So one of the things that we have to do is patch up the $5 billion hole without raising taxes. We've got to find where the cuts can be made in state government spending to allow for it's both partially a shift because we spent money on COVID, but also the state government is funded majority-wise by the sales tax. And when you lock everybody in their house for months on end, your sales tax receipts go down. And so the state has less money as it's been spending more. So that is a big issue that's going to have to be taken care of. And the second thing that our voters are interested in is their schools. They want to know how we're going to get kids back to school. We're just starting to do that now. And as we get into session, we'll be at halftime. We'll be the first semester will be over, and we'll be getting ready to go back after the Christmas break. And the question will be, how can you continue to provide a quality education, and can you have everybody back in school? And a lot of that we will see in the coming weeks how well getting mixing the children back in live instruction is working. And those bread and butter basic issues are the first things you have to take care of. And then after that, people get concerned about other issues that they want to push. I will say this: we always talk about when a session is going to be dominated by redistricting or dominated by some big issue, as if nothing else happens. The House will have 40 committees that will meet and will kick out bills, and there will still be things that get done. It will be harder to pass major controversial legislation that requires the effort of the whole body. But there'll still be 1,300 bills passed, and they'll affect every facet of life in Texas.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for people to kind of understand the scope of legislation that has to get through in that 140-day period. And I would make an educated guess that even most voters don't understand that for the first 60 days, you can't really discuss anything on the floor unless it's an emergency item. Obviously, looking at the landscape, there's probably going to be a few of these big ticket items that are going to be put on that emergency calendar. So we'll hopefully see some of that progress early on, but with so much to handle, this is going to probably be a session where committees are going to be working even more overtime. And when you add to it kind of the uncertainty of how a session looks like in a post-COVID, world, we start to see that this is going to have to be a session where we're going to need to be flexible. People are going to need to be engaged, though, as well. So, we've already seen that some of the Democratic representatives, the incumbents who know they're coming back, have said for sure, oh, my office isn't going to be open to the public this session. I know we don't want to jump the shark too much on the conversation. There's an election to be won, but have you given any thought to how your office might operate given the COVID preparations that are being made for the House?
Yes, I mean, we will still be meeting with people. The extent to which we take precautions to help slow the spread of the infection have yet to be determined. The House Administration Committee did a survey of all the members, and it came from every answer from we're going to do business as usual to we're going to put on spacesuits and not let anybody anywhere near us. I don't think you can do business without meeting with people. I think that you have to be able to look people in the eye and talk to them. I had dinner last night with a friend of mine who usually does a lot of business travel. And he said, technically, I can do some of these things, by Zoom or by Teams. But really, at the end of the day, when we can get back to it, there is no substitute for looking somebody in the eye. And so I think that there will still be a lot of that. I still think members of the House will do it with each other. By the same token, I have 200,000 constituents, and not that many of them can travel to Austin during the session. So fortunately, for the last 60 or 70 years, we've had telephones in the House, and we have email, and we have other ability to meet with people. Some of the stuff that people have learned during COVID will actually be useful when it's over. We can have Zoom calls with people, and we can have all these other things where they don't have to drive the 150 miles just to meet with us during a session. But at the end of the day, we're going to be as open as we can be and be as direct with people as we can because it's your legislature. I love the fact that we don't refer to ourselves as assemblymen like I do in California, New Jersey. We're representatives because that's what we do. We can't have 28 million people gather on the House floor to vote. So each 200,000 of you send somebody. And their job is to represent the people who sent them. And you can't represent the people who send them unless you've heard from them and have some idea of what they really care about. And that's one of the reasons why I love knocking on doors in an election. And I tell voters this. I said, you do it to help you win the election, but it makes you a much better legislator. Because when things come up fast and furious on the floor of the House, an amendment you've never seen before, you have a much better understanding for how your district feels about it if you talk to thousands of them at their front door.
Absolutely. And continued engagement during the session is crucial because legislation changes quickly. Sometimes members won't find out about it until it comes to committee or, an amendment is brought to the floor. So you got to be vigilant through the entire process all the way to sine die. But you got quite a road before that. You got early voting is, 3 weeks away, just about, and election day on November 3rd. As we wrap up here, Mike, I want to give you a chance to speak directly to the voters in House District 132. Here's your chance to give them the pitch. Why should they support you this fall?
For the same reason that you've supported me in the past, if you live in Katy and Cypress, you need somebody who represents you, not the national progressive movement, not any of the people in New York or California who want to ban guns in Texas or to think that they know better than we do how we should live. You need somebody who's looking out for you, who's looking out for the industries that employ our people, who's looking out to make sure that Texas maintains its status as the envy of the country, not just because our economy is good, but because we push individual freedom, individual responsibility, and that's what leads to that economy that's the envy of the rest of the world. As I tell folks when they move here from California or other places, you're welcome here, and we'd love to have you contribute to our economy, but don't act like we should be like the place you left. You left for a reason. So for the voters in Katy and Cypress, I'm asking for your support. I'm asking to represent you again in Austin, and hopefully you will all come out between October 13th and November 3rd and vote, and I would appreciate your support.
Excellent, Mike. Thank you so much for joining us. And I certainly do appreciate everything that you are doing in Harris County to try and bring this district back for Republicans. We look forward to seeing you on Saturday. And that's a reminder to all you YRs listening into this. We have a national deployment this Saturday right there in House District 132. YRNF is coming down to help knock for Wesley Hunt. Texas YRs are coming to knock for Mike Schofield. So Mike, thank you so much for joining us. For anyone who wants to find out more about you, the campaign, where can they go to? Website, social media links, give us all that stuff.
They can go to MikeSchofield.com is our website. And that's really the best place to go because it has the links to everything that all of our Facebook and our Twitter and all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, when you come to when you come to Katy and Cypress this weekend, you'll love knocking on doors here so much that you probably won't go home, and we'll have to find housing for you here. So come on down, but just bring your one-way pass. You're probably not going home.
Excellent. Well, I'm excited to get back down to the Houston area. That's where I'm from originally. So I always enjoy a chance to go to my old stomping grounds. Mike, we'll see you this weekend.
Thank you much.
Thank you, sir. All right. Thank you again to Mike for joining us. Thank you to you for tuning in. As always, you can find this podcast on Apple Podcast, on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, Anchor, wherever you get your podcasts, you can find it there. And if you want to watch this, you can play back watch all the fun technical glitches and magical fixes that I make happen in post-production. You can watch this on YouTube, Facebook, follow Texas YR's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can follow this podcast at Big Texas Podcast on Twitter and Instagram, and make sure that you go to our website. Get signed up for these deployments. Early voting starts on October 13th here in Texas, continues through October 30th, and we've got all these fun deployments going on. Austin YRs has got a deployment. They're playing in laser tag, so Dustin, he's always got something. He's got to take it to the next level, right? Really raising the bar for all the YR clubs that are helping us make it happen for these key districts. Again, texasyr.gop/deployments for more information to get signed up. This is a great opportunity for YRs to get active and get involved this election cycle. Till next time, friends, we'll see you down the road.